Cardstack community. My name is Chrissy. I'm the founding director of the Cardstack project, coming to you from the land of the Web3. Today, I'm joined by Umee's founder, Brent, who's going to talk about the DeFi lending ecosystem within the Cosmo world. A very exciting new ecosystem that is emerging to be leading the innovation about what DeFi can do and also how these different internet blockchain can interact in a way that not only satisfy the globalness of our ability to interact in a composable way, but also allow for independent innovation of ideas that may be in our head, but now being tried in a real world. Welcome, Brent.
Really great to be here. Thanks for having me, Chris.
Excellent. Thanks, Brent, for giving us some insight on how you got to this idea of working within the Cosmo ecosystem and this particular ideas about DeFi lending, the opportunity within your sphere. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey to Web3 and to DeFi in particular?
Yeah, certainly. It's been a very wild ride in this whole ecosystem. I was lucky enough to be introduced by this ecosystem to this ecosystem by some pretty great educators out there. So I originally learned about Bitcoin and crypto from a class taught at Duke University by Cam Harvey. He was an economics professor who became very disillusioned by life in the financial system back in 2008 when the mortgage crisis happened. And he was a major libertarian. He didn't really develop hope for the world until Bitcoin came out, and he felt, oh, this is the answer to all of our problems. So he taught a class on Bitcoin back in 2013, I believe. And I was able to attend and learn about this ecosystem, and everything just kind of evolved from there. I eventually joined Consensus when Joe Lubin gave a talk at one of his classes, and just help build out the Ethereum ecosystem. As a quick side note, I also have an anecdote where I graduated college the same year as Fred Ursham, the co-founder of Coinbase.
Yes.
So he was actually giving out free Bitcoin to his friends back in the early days, and we were just like, "What is this stuff? What's going on here?" But spent several years at Consensus. Helped build out the Ethereum ecosystem, back before the MetaMask and Furos and Truffles were out. Just helped hire and build out those teams and expand the Ethereum ecosystem. I eventually left and I joined the Cosmos ecosystem. I joined Tendermint, which is the team responsible for creating the Cosmos SDK, for writing Tendermint Consensus, which is a BFT, modern BFT consensus protocol with Jay Kwan. And, after we had shipped a really powerful communication protocol called IBC, which is used to connect all Cosmos platforms, I realized time to leave and start my own project, which is in the Cosmos borrowing and lending side of things. And so that's kind of my progression. Before crypto, I spent over half a decade trading bonds. So the borrowing and lending space just seemed like a nice interface to get into between crypto and the rest of the financial ecosystem.
Absolutely. It is amazing that when people look at Cosmos as, oh, that's a new ecosystem. And I actually heard of Tendermint in 2014 as a consensus way. And it was at the time where it was not sure if enterprise blockchain is going to be a thing or whether people are going to shop for a consensus algorithm that would scale better than proof of work. That was I actually was sharing a stage with someone from the Tendermint team. It was very fuzzy very early on in like a private family office type of presentation in Midtown Manhattan. Of all places, not the hotbed of crypto. But what's interesting about it is how, based on that kind of one innovation, that there's this new ecosystem is involved around that. So from a person who has worked in various types of kind of role, both in terms of building a DeFi program, prior to that working on core protocol, what do you think is the new thing that Tendermint, which is an old thing, but is maturing, is offering that people who are in the Ethereum space and may be familiar with the limitations and the capability don't know? What is a secret sauce that if you're a chef cooking with Tendermint that you would be able to cook up that the Ethereum Solidity person would not immediately recognize?
Certainly. And it's really enlightening seeing the development of these protocols since the beginning. So, back in 2014, when Vitalik was giving talks on proof of stake and how he, wanted to work with proof of stake protocols, Jay Kwan, the founder of Tendermint, was on the same panels with Vitalik. In fact, they actually coincided and came up with some ideas together. For example, the idea of slashing conditions. For example, being able to slash, some proof of stake rewards if, you act maliciously or you equivocate. It's funny. Jay Kwan came up with a name for it. He called it the fallacy of like not doing your job, or something, a complicated name. And then Vitalik was like, "That's a good idea. Let's change the name. Let's call it slashing." And that's kind of how the concept of slashing got created. But I think
but Vitalik is pretty good at coming up with names. You got to say the surge, the purge, and the verge. Those are some good language wordplay. He's a word cell, even though he's a shape rotator in chief.
He knows how to ship a protocol and make it fun and exciting. And it's absolutely impressive.
Yeah.
They're impressive.
Slashing it is.
I like slashing. We could have gone with Jay's version, but I think Vitalik took that one for the fallacy of not performing correct calculations.
Right.
But it's funny. Jay Kwan went off and built Tendermint, BFT. And it's surprising how many other, fast finality consensus protocols reference Tendermint BFT. There's, many forms of BFT like Istanbul BFT. There's just so many derivatives. Eamon Gunsayer from Cornell, he was actually one of Jay Kwan's mentors back when Jay was studying computer science at Cornell. A lot of Avalanche's consensus protocol is based off of, something similar to the Tendermint ecosystem. Other professors like Elaine Shi with Thunder Token, as well as the Algorand folks also derived knowledge from those consensus protocols. And even the way that we see ETH 2.0, when we saw the development of Casper, the friendly finality gadget, and the Ethereum ecosystem, took a lot of lessons learned in achieving finality. And so the secret sauce that you referenced earlier is definitely the speed and adoption of this consensus protocol, and also the real secret sauce is that you'd be surprised by how many other consensus protocols were influenced by Tendermint and how interoperable they are. The interoperability between Tendermint and every other fast finality consensus protocol is really what I consider kind of like the secret thing that makes it all tie together.
Yeah, it's like almost like knowing that the same gadget or IoT device are all based on the same chip, and you realize that you can connect them together because they're speaking the same either OS or protocol. It's because in this kind of Shenzhen style fast copying and everybody modeling each other, there is a kind of ecosystem wide between competitors of compatibility come from that, deriving from the same technical truth. So we see that in the hardware space. You're saying that in the protocol space, you're seeing that as well.
I really like that chip example. I feel like that is exactly hits the mark. Like everything is able to connect. Everything's able to kind of interoperate with each other. And it's kind of cool to see that analogy in the hardware space as well.
Yeah, sometimes I feel like the blockchain space evolved both very fast, as in things are changing all the time, and then you see like a love and investment in Tendermint. It really requires tender loving care for a long time for it to evolve, and the fact that there's a lot of offspring from it is even better.
It's funny with proof of stake. When I first joined Consensus back in 2016, we were told that proof of stake was going to ship next year. We're like, hey, should we mine Ethereum? And everyone's saying, no, don't mine Ethereum. It's proof of stake is going to, Serenity, which is what they called proof of stake, is going to ship in next year, 2017. And we're waiting. We're like, okay, it's going to ship.
Yeah.
But we've been waiting for many, many years. So.
I can definitely attest to the fact that when I was talking to a lot of the same people you mentioned, like Joe and Vitalik and stuff like that, about ETH1, ETH2 was in the tongue, right? Like they were talking about ETH2 as in the imminent next thing, but it turns out that journey took a little longer than let's say a year.
Oh, certainly. And I am just deeply impressed by how that upgrade just,
Yes.
happened effectively. It was pretty seamless, and I attribute it to the fact that they just tested the upgrade on every test net they could. They looked at
Yes.
every edge case. They looked at every, potential fallacy that could happen, and this the smooth transition between Ethereum via the merge is just those, those are really good executors when it comes to this tech
Yeah,
side of things.
that's real engineering here. The cutover, right? I was on the live cast, watching the panda, looking for the panda to show up, and it was so uneventful. I went to sleep 30 minutes later. It's like the fact that I can go to sleep 30 minutes after the merge and be able to go to sleep as well is a testament to the amount of engineering and professionalism and care and just absolute, you know, commitment to success. And people look at sometimes Web2 people, which my brethren from back in the days were like, oh, Web3 is not real tech. It's like, well, it's hard, difficult tech. It may not have the consumer scale that your web scale S3 bucket has, but it definitely has the same professional engineering that at least now, with more people that grew up with the space, there's also people joining the space that has been that's working on this stuff. So from yours thoughts. Obviously, this is, our conversation just now probably makes sense to people who have been following the space, but to most people who understand tech, see themselves as savvy, that was gibberish. It's still very foreign to the lived experience of building web scale application, let's say. What is your sense of the kind of the trigger of our adoption, especially for the Cosmos ecosystem, right? Obviously, there's a different wallet technology. There's a different set of kind of knowledge and jargon and expectation. Since you're now kind of shifting away from kind of working on a protocol, understanding how the challenges of making these proof of stake system works, and moving to using a proof of stake system, what are you seeing in terms of both the challenges, but probably more interested than that for me, what are the shortcuts that a system in Cosmos provide to a new developer, new to blockchain and Web3 development? What can Cosmo offer that is a way to gain that user adoption that would be, let's say, ahead of other ecosystems?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that really is the $1 billion question for this space. And it's funny. You mentioned the challenge and the shortcut. The challenge and the shortcut are actually the same thing, in my opinion, for the Cosmos space. This is what I
Interesting.
mean. So I referenced earlier the reason I left Tendermint to start Umee is because the Cosmos ecosystem successfully shipped a protocol called IBC.
Yes.
So IBC is a very special protocol. It's basically a
What does this
module.
stand for again? IBC, what does the acronym stand for?
Certainly, it stands for Inter-Blockchain Communication Protocol. It's effectively a module within the state machine of one chain that relays messages to a module within the state machine of another chain that acts as this transport authentication and ordering layer that connects between those two chains. In layman's terms, what this means is that you can send packets of information from one chain to another with really fast finality. The finality is dependent upon the speed of the consensus of the blockchain itself. And so the way it ferries packets of data from one chain to another as a low-level communication protocol is very, very similar to how TCP/IP routes packets of data from one router to another, to the point
Right.
where we actually think that IBC can be the second coming of TCP/IP for the crypto ecosystem. We think
Right.
that IBC is able to connect everything together, to connect any fast finality chain. This also coincides with what I said earlier about Tendermint. Tendermint is a replicated consensus protocol that other chains have taken pieces of to build.
Yep.
And basically, I think that IBC can connect every chain together via this low-level communication protocol. And so the challenge that you're referencing is that you just gotta get other chains to accept this communication protocol as a viable mechanism to connect these chains, and therefore lies the big challenge in one of these major innovations for Cosmos.
Right. And what's interesting about it, in the absence of something like IBC in the ecosystem, there have been a lot of point-to-point bridges where the finality is measured in, I need to wait 30 minutes for my funds to show up, and hopefully it does. We've all used some of those bridges. We've actually built some based on the XDAI chain, which is now Gnosis Chain's bridge technology for certain things that we're doing with payment network as a layer 2. So, deposit and withdraw into this fast network can go through these kind of point-to-point bridge. And then you have people talking about, like, are there like layer 0 or this kind of like bridge protocol that reduces the security risk, and people looking at Chainlink having been a trusted oracle that sits in between as possibly that middleware. Do you see IBC as the type of generalized bridge technology between these chains, especially ones that's moving to proof of stake or is proof of stake?
Yeah, so I think the way to look at it is that, it's, definitely XDAI chain, Gnosis chain, brought a lot of innovation to, how you connect between different chains. The one thing to note about the architecture of a lot of these, these bridges is that in many ways they felt like, there was a intermediary bridge between the two chains, and then intermediary bridge sort of was a custodian, or
Yes.
sort of in some ways a glorified multi-sig. In some instances, the bridge was so vast that it was a chain in and of itself. For example, when you look at the layer zeros, or some of the bridges in Cosmos that connect between a fast finality Cosmos chain with a probabilistic finality Ethereum chain, the bridges themselves were just chains in and of themselves that had a consensus protocol, and they had a
Yes.
native token that secured the validity of the bridge. And so these are good temporary solutions, but as you referenced earlier, a lot of times you'd have to wait multiple transaction confirmations. If you bridge from Polygon to Ethereum, you actually have to wait block confirmations due to the probabilistic finality of the chain-to-chain interaction.
And both sides, actually.
That's correct.
Two probability, yeah.
And so the basis of IBC is that as long as you have a module within the state machine of that blockchain, and as long as you represent the consensus protocol of that chain to accept the IBC transaction, of course, this is, as I mentioned, a challenge. Not every chain is going to want you to modify their overall state machine. But right now, all Cosmos chains accept this. We actually successfully connected the Umee blockchain with the Polygon testnet via their Heimdall consensus layer via IBC. And this is due to the fact that Polygon uses a consensus protocol called Peppermint, which is a fork of Tendermint. Once again, it's Tendermint all the way down, and therefore it was quite easy. Binance chain also uses a fork of Tendermint consensus, and you're going to see a lot of these cross-chain interactions can be facilitated by this IBC as a cross-chain communication protocol.
Yeah, I think this whole idea of the whole probabilistic versus not type probabilistic kind of finality type of thing is really where the compatibility and the need for that custodian multisig appears. But I do believe this idea that these blockchain can communicate, whether they're directly on top of the Cosmos SDK in the way that you will write a Cosmos application, or just compatible with the layer underneath, or Tendermint, or some other mint, Peppermint, or Spearmint, or whatever. Like, we come up with new mint. That you probably run out of genomes of mint after a while if there's so many versions of it. That seems like a very good way, because I really believe there's that lack of interoperability, or the very expensive and risky interoperability that we provide right now by way of these custodial bridge, let's call them, right? Semi-custodial or custodial, depends on how you look at it. It seems like a no-brainer in terms of something you want to achieve. Do you see in the Cosmos ecosystem, you mentioned that you were working in the Ethereum space prior to MetaMask and Ethereum. MetaMask obviously being the user-facing wallet, and the inferior is the lifesaver or the life taker, depends on how you look at it from a developer point of view. In terms of that, what do you see as the kind of consumer on-ramp, state of consumer on-ramp within the Cosmos ecosystem? And then can you tell us a little bit about how that relates to your launch using those tools in the ecosystem for Umee.
Certainly. So, we saw with Ethereum, tools like, MetaMask and Vera Truffle really brought in the massive user adoption in this space. And with Cosmos, it's actually very special. With Cosmos, every chain can be their own app, and there's sort of this there's ability to bring a lot of chains in this ecosystem. So, and the fact that they can all connect with each other via IBC is a major improvement to blockchain mesh interactivity. In terms of bringing more folks into the Cosmos space, I think I want to tackle this question from bringing more folks into the Cosmos space, because in terms of like user facing side, there's already a few good tools, but I think the true uses of Cosmos is being able to launch chains via the Cosmos SDK. And the way that Umee is approaching this is that we actually launched a lending DAO called UDX. UDX is focused on expanding the borrowing and lending interface for all crypto assets. And so the way that we're actually bringing more users and more adoption into Cosmos is for every loan issued through UDX, we want a loan specific blockchain, basically a way to launch a blockchain that affiliates with every single loan that's part of the network. And this is our way to basically expand, mass adoption of Cosmos and just encourage, more users to be able to see the different interfaces and to access, all of these chains via a unified connective layer. So that's kind of what we're doing for the overall Cosmos space.
So in the world where launching a blockchain and is free or cheap or very easy to connect it, so you're not really creating a new island off the waters of the New York Harbor, which is behind me here, then nobody can get there. That's not very useful. Obviously, with the bridge and the ability for that to connect, it's great. What do you think is the biggest reason where either dApp or even in some cases a user of a dApp wants to launch their own blockchain? When does that trigger become sensible?
Yeah, so by all means, when launching a dApp, a lot of times it makes sense to use a pre-existing chain. You might want to use Ethereum, you might want to use a side chain or a layer 2 scaling solution, or you might want to use one of the pre-existing established Cosmos chains. But I think the key to launching a chain itself is when you want a very viable business mechanism, like a very complicated use case, where you want all the full resources of the consensus protocol of that chain dedicated to your app or business or loan or what have you. And so when you want all of the consensus resources, all of the interoperability, all of the flow of TVL, of that particular use case you have in mind to concentrate in your chain and have the consensus protocol of the chain dedicated to that use case, that's when it makes sense to launch a new chain. And so we viewed this being a part of launching loans, because loans are actually quite complicated. Loans themselves are, sort of their own business entities, and they require a lot of loops, a lot of iterations, a lot of calculations that don't necessarily make sense on more monolithic chains. And so we felt that it made sense to dedicate all of the resources of a chain specifically to a lot of these use cases. And so that's kind of the logic that we use for why we want to launch loan-specific blockchains, and the same logic that should be applied for anyone else who wants to launch their own chain and eventually use the full force of their blockchain. Eventually, we think that there's going to be a chain on a cell phone. Cell phones are going to have chains on them. They're going to be so lightweight if we apply sort of a Moore's law approach to blockchain scalability. And so that's kind of the way that we see the evolution of this space.
Absolutely. Some people say, "Oh, I want some version history of the work that you're doing." It's like, "Can I introduce you to blockchains?" And then people get pretty surprised when I say, "Yeah, a version management system is kind of like a chain, right? Each chain is deltas, and you can trace it, and you can share it, or you can validate that actually came from that history." And then I tell them that Git, which is a protocol for developer version control, is like a blockchain. Those are the type of either really interesting dinner conversations, or I lost the people and I have to change my subject and talk about the Yankees or something. But but hopefully I'm in a privileged situation with like-minded people and that is interested in that kind of thing. Do you see
Chris,
this?
are you suggesting we're going to launch a GitHub chain? Because that would be amazing.
We should do that, right? We actually thought about doing something with, anchoring commits to chain, which actually does make sense because if you think about the ability for you to use something like Filecoin or Arweave to store the actual files themselves, all you really need to know is what is head, what is the latest version. You can use blockchain for that, and then with the combination of some files and some blockchain, maybe some monetization, you can actually put most of GitHub, maybe not the UI part, on chain, and actually leverage a lot of Git for the actual storage and packing of the data and the kind of the reduction. So we did some research around that. We call it Git chain, and it was kind of a kludgy, using Ethereum blockchain with a smart contract dealing with heads, and then a bunch of storage on IPFS dealing with the actual bytes, and then a CLI, a command line program, to kind of munch it together. But it's definitely possible. It seems like on the Cosmos SDK that may be easier.
Before you launch the Git chain, can you make sure to delete some of the arguments on GitHub, for my org, to make sure that they're not solidified into the blockchain?
That seems like a good idea. You can change history in Git, but you can't change history in a blockchain.
Exactly.
So that there's certainly some differences there.
For the other folks out there, we'll launch a Yankees chain too. That will be the next step after Git chain.
I think that'd be good. The high water mark is going to be 62, and then you never get over block 62. That's a very local Aaron Judge joke. So tell me a little bit about the Umee protocol in terms of, from your experience trading bonds. Obviously, the kind of money market, DeFi product like Compound were relatively simplistic. I wouldn't say trivial. I would say quite basic. If you talk about, traditional banking and then kind of like bond products and various types of fixed income product, it gets pretty complicated right away. I was trying to understand a white paper. Someone gave me around a chain that was, I think Adapter was doing options. I was like, this is beyond me. I understand it, but I don't grok it. There's a difference between the two. It's because, as a technologist, I think I understand all the technical bits, but I don't understand the kind of, TradFi bit. Tell me a little bit about what you're bringing with Umee into the kind of the DeFi space from your understanding of what is possible and what will allow for more kind of non-speculative, useful financial products on DeFi for people who are looking for more capital efficiency.
Yeah, so the bond markets are the biggest, one of the biggest, if not the biggest market in the world. Fixed income is just, it touches every part of the financial system globally with every nation in the world. There is debt. Debt is, one of the foundations of human society. But one of the problems is that the bond market is also one of the most opaque markets in the world. It's built around institutions that hold a lot of these connections in a black box mechanism for how business is conducted. And so one way we look at it is that we want to open source the bond markets. We want to put the bond markets on a public blockchain. Public blockchains are great for transparency. They're also great for auditability. Open source code is, the future of how software should be written. It's also, open source code is a form of freedom of speech.
For sure.
And so that's the direction we're going. And we want to do it piece by piece. For example, in order to have a bond market, you need something called a yield curve or a term structure of interest rates. This is this is basically like a treasury curve that represents what your risk-free rate is, so that you can use this curve to price other forms of borrowing and lending. And so that doesn't exist in crypto yet. We're building that. We're
Right.
building a native yield curve that uses a term structure of interest rates to determine, for example, the time value of an Ethereum, a time value of a DAI, a time value of a Link, time value of an MKR token, time value of an AVAX, time value of a Matic token, time value of a Cosmos token. And so by having that, the first thing that you get is you're able to build credit. So credit quality is actually it's actually based on a derivative of the risk-free rate. So if you have, for example, a risk-free rate for a 1 year loan, then you're able to price, the credit quality of, let's say, another protocol that wants to borrow money at 1 year, and you get to price their interest rate based on a spread to what the risk-free rate is. So after you have a risk-free rate, you have credit. After you have credit, you have a world of possibilities on just all the complicated products that you can build. And so Umee is focused on a few things. Umee is focused on sort of that simplistic money market borrowing and lending side of things. But we're also focused on bringing a yield curve or a term structure of interest rates to crypto. And on top of that, UDX, the announcement that we just made about a week ago, is going to be focused on bringing the rest of the bond markets into crypto by onboarding many different institutional supporters and just allowing these tools to be used in a broader sense. And slowly but surely, we want to get all the TradFi bond ecosystem to get it rebuilt in crypto. And I think that's the future goal of this.
It's really exciting. It shows how important it is to know where you're going while you're stepping into it. And it's very easy to say, I am doing a money market protocol on pick a random selection on the chain. But to know that is a prerequisite, almost like a kind of foundation of technology. But then you have 2 or 3 more steps. Those are, I believe, the type of planning that you have to do in the industry that seems like you can never plan. No, oh yeah, you can, right? Because the roadmap is in the system that we are, either replacing or supplementing or whatever it might be. The question is, how did those use cases where there's a different type of bond mechanisms and stuff like that, and credit market mechanism, how does that translate to the quirky tools of blockchain stuff? That's really, really interesting. You mentioned a little bit earlier that the computation necessary to do these kind of second and tertiary building blocks on top of a basic money market or the underlying assets that the money market manages. What is the type of processing that's happening to create this yield curve? Like, what is the sausage making process of making this yield curve?
Certainly. So let's take a thought experiment. I think I can break down this experiment in a way that folks out there can understand. Let's take a Ethereum and we put it in a smart contract for 30 days. And I'm sure folks out there know about AMM pools. Let's imagine putting that 30-day Ethereum into an AMM pool with a spot Ethereum, basically Ethereum that's readily tradable. Now, AMM pools really like mean reverting assets. That means assets that whose prices are roughly stay the same because it minimizes impermanent loss and minimizes negative effects of putting something in an AMM pool. And effectively, the value of that 30-day ETH, the Ethereum that's locked in that smart contract for 30 days, is the time value of Ethereum in 30 days. So, immediately you have the time value of money, you have the time value of Ethereum. You can take this same concept and extrapolate it to 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, 120 days, 1 year, 2 year, 5 year, 10 year, 30 years. And you have the development of a forward curve, basically a curve that can basically price time. Like this curve is designed to price the value of Ethereum during these different time periods. You can get a little bit complicated too. You can, for example, instead of putting an Ethereum, you put a staked Ethereum, like a proof of stake Ethereum.
Yeah.
That's allocating proof of stake yield during that 1 month time, 2 month time. You can put a proof of stake atom, an atom that's staked. You can put any proof of stake token, and you get to a point where proof of stake consensus is actually being used as something to represent different forms of opportunity cost. It's also used to, you know, be sort of this proxy to measure inflation, or even sometimes hedge against inflation, economic inflation. I mean, like CPI.
Yes.
And so that's the magic of crypto and yield curves. You can really figure out the value of time. And I think blockchain consensus protocols, the most important concept in all of finance and economics really is the concept of time value. Probably heard
Absolutely. I mean, for the people who have been kind of waiting for the merge to happen, how much is a stake ETH worth 2 months before is the, first of all, when is going to happen, when is going to unlock, and then pricing at time. I mean, yes, it's like one time period of one uncertainty, but people are getting the sense that this idea of ETH and stake ETH and the time aspects and risk aspect, there's a thing there. And what you're basically saying that that's a one-time event for a group of people to worry and not be able to sleep. It's actually the foundation for understanding in a more general sense, a more continuous sense of, you know, what are the different plots along the way. It's brilliant. That was a great analogy. Stake ETH does makes it more complicated, but it is something that I think a lot of people do understand, especially people who have held some ETH or have some stake ETH, God forbid, in that time period. And it feels like, you know, what is my time worth, right? That's what you ask yourself every day.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you know, time is money, right? And so stake ETH is just
It is.
representative of you know, the ability to measure opportunity costs. And this technology is powerful. Like
Yes.
blockchain is really just a transformation of how we should view, you know, all just the way the markets are built together. So I think you hit the
Yep.
nail on the head there in terms of just the importance that this could represent for folks.
It's really cool. You know, I had a finance friend of mine that was trying to explain to me, like, you know, fixed income versus equity. It was like, you know, imagine an M&M. That's the equity market. Imagining the Pacific Ocean. That's fixed income, right? Maybe a slight exaggeration, but I don't think so. I think it's a lot of things that are fixed income that is in that kind of bond market that people, regular people don't see. It's not on CNBC in the same way. It's reduced into one number or two numbers or 10 numbers. But yeah, it's really what keeps the world going, you know?
Yeah, and you know, fixed income is also, you know, slower moving in terms of just innovation, just because you're handling such large amounts of capital. With equity markets, you definitely get this, you know, volatility aspect that kind of appeals to sort of the traditional investor. But yeah, fixed income, you know, definitely a space to gradually expand and evolve. And yeah, we think that crypto is a great way to kind of transform it and just make it more efficient and just really revolutionize how we look at things. You can also think of like I don't know if you're familiar with sort of the history of the mortgage crisis, but the truth of the matter is that the mortgage crisis, you know, it happened in 2008, but it was actually happening for 30 years. It was happening since the first issuance of the mortgage-backed security back in 1984. And
Right.
basically, you had layers of bad debt, layers of toxic rehypothecation, and layers of just bad practices layered on top of each other for 30 years. And basically, after 30 years of bad stuff happening, you had a meltdown where $50 trillion of value was just disappeared from the global economy. Very, very bad. But the cool part about crypto is that, you know, we saw these you know, bankruptcies and defaults with like BlockFi, Celsius,
Yeah.
Voyager, Volt,
The
you know,
centralized CDFi, you know, or
yeah,
CFI, or maybe even CFI, you know,
all the
arguably.
CFI, all the CFI players, and you saw them go bankrupt and go belly up. But what's really kind of the silver lining, which actually positive part of them going belly up, is that it they only were able to get away with what they were doing for about 2 or 3 years, and the bankruptcy only took 2 or 3 months to happen. They just,
That's
you
true.
know,
Yeah.
everything was on a public blockchain. Everything, you know, Bitcoin, you can't, you know, it's publicly auditable, and so that's a major improvement. Like you allowed, you know, bad companies to go bankrupt in the span of 2 months, as opposed to allowing them 30 years of the ability to, you know, hide debt and rehypothecate. And so I
Yes.
think society is moving in the right direction with this tech.
Yeah, it's amazing how much progress is mentioned by this. It's measured by the speed of iteration instead of just the speed itself, right? If you can recover very fast, if you can try again and put it again, that's really where you kind of advance the clock. I'm not saying everything is turn based, but it's the number of turns that we can take that really advance the game, not just the elapsed time. And obviously, if you take a lot of turns really quickly, which seems like we're doing in increasing frequency, we are actually having a lot of elapsed times or person years being evolved. I have one question for you, and this is something that I've asked the media folks that's thinking about the future of media and Web3. Are the people in the traditional finance world going to be leading the translation of their hard-earned expertise in bond markets or options market or whatever, forex market? Or do you think the kids who are trading Doge today is going to finally learn and kind of get the sense of what you're teaching them and learn along the way and become the real masters by way of this amateurish learning? Are we waiting for the professional TradFi people to come and enlighten us? Or are we just going to figure it out on our own? Present company excluded.
That is definitely it's kind of a loaded question, and I appreciate that question. That is that question hits deep into a lot of folks' hearts because this is a big market and there is thousands of years of debt history that built the debt markets to what they are today. The way I see it is that it's really hard to say whether or not a legacy tech or legacy TradFi, companies are going to necessarily, want to, address this innovation, whether they want to really acknowledge some of this change, because that's sometimes part of the business. Part of the advantages of, legacy TradFi systems is just the opacity is, how
Yes.
they make money. If they're, sort of a broker, the way they generate revenues is by, knowing more than, what's available out in the rest of the market. I think, the true beacon of innovation that can happen in this market is really, sort of a hybrid approach. Basically, a project or an ecosystem that knows both sides of the equation, who
Right.
have spent time on in legacy fixed income trading, but also know very much about DeFi, open source tech, the importance of crypto, and just figure out a way to incept, similar to how electric cars first came out. Like, it wasn't necessarily the legacy car makers that created the best solution. It was more an outsider that understood parts of that ecosystem and who were able to kind of incept a really good product in there. And so I think the way we see it is we hope that the innovation does permeate, but whether it be coming from a traditional bond trading shop is a kind of a difficult call in my mind at the moment.
I think if you look at the people who work for SpaceX and Tesla, a lot of them had experience working for Lockheed Martin on the SpaceX side and working for, maybe GM on stuff like that. But the operating system, the corporate environment, possibly the culture, and obviously the founder does make a huge difference in about providing a new way of working together. But I'm a deep believer that in Web3 we have to really, Web 1 plus Web 2, not Web 1 gone, Web 2 gone. It's just about building on top of technology. And we feel the same way around some of the stuff we're working on, which is to build the next generation Web 3 user interface, which is what we focus on. A lot of the tech we need is coming from places like LinkedIn. Like, how do you do web scale, with 400 engineers working together, build one cohesive UI? Could we make a cohesive UI for DeFi or for Web 3 for DAO? Well, modularization, micro front end, these are all things that are being worked on in this larger company. And there are some intersection, not exactly the same. We don't have the same command and control structure, but certainly in JavaScript land, you could share some techniques, and there's a lot of work we do. But it's definitely a bit mixed. But one thing that is hard to get rid of is someone who, a founder who has that clarity on both sides, and it seems like you do. And I'm sure every day you're working on a conflict. It's like, can I do this? Should I do this? Can I do that? Should I do that? But it seems like you have a very clear mind going forward, and that we need more of people like you who have done both protocol work, dApp work, TradFi, CeFi, and more importantly, understanding culture and the importance of open source. Because at the end of the day, that's where the composability really lies.
No, definitely. I mean, really appreciate your support on that front, and I think part of it is also just getting past the psychological barriers. I think with this technology, it's beyond the tech side of things. There's also sort of the human social aspects. These are like highly guarded parts of the way financial systems work.
For sure.
And so part of it's just kind of getting the legacy incumbents comfortable enough with how the development's going, and it's definitely a career long, like, dedicated challenge, and in and of itself. And we're approaching it from the financial side of things. We're also approaching it from the protocol side. IBC is sort of our flagship, our North Star, so to speak.
Right.
I think IBC being adopted as a, TCP/IP of crypto, and
Right.
eventually seeing just the launch of more and more blockchains. This is just going to naturally accelerate the progression of these ideas. So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
No, I think it's really exciting to see kind of innovation and progress being made in multiple layers. And we cover many of them right now as consensus layer, the actual like IBC, the kind of bridging and communication layer, and obviously the application itself. To say that Bond is a dApp is kind of a bit of a understatement and overstatement at the same time. It is a whole market, and it is a whole kind of craft and understanding. But it's very, very cool to have you share with us today very specific insights in how those three things work together. And crypto founders, jacks of many trades, but obviously we have a lot to learn from each other, and I learned a lot from you today in those particular areas, which are not areas my expertise. But I seem like I know a little bit more. Hopefully, it doesn't cost me to launch another DeFi lending protocol. I'll focus on what I know to do, which is UI composition. That was its own domain. Are there any other things you want to share with the community today based on the progress of your project, and like kind of what are the next thing for you guys to focus on or now?
Certainly. So, the way we see it is that this network is this whole blockchain ecosystem is always about upgrades, and so we're looking forward to our major mainnet upgrade that's going to allow native IBC assets to be borrowed and lent between different chains. And so, that's
Nice.
actually right around the corner. It's around the horizon, and it's we're looking forward to bringing so much more activity to IBC, to the IBC network. We're looking forward to bringing more attention to this ecosystem, and I'm just happy to be talking about those types of innovations and tech progressions on this podcast. And overall, just I hope folks keep a lookout. In a way, with UDX, we want to launch the Drexel Burnham of the crypto debt ecosystem, and we want to basically build out this entire market. And I hope folks keep a lookout and check out what we're building.
Yeah, and the revolution will not be televised. It will just be published on an immutable ledger and commentated on various YouTube and podcasts. So I'm glad we add to the history of the annotation of this director commentary as this thing is happening actually for all to see. And that transparency is really what drives our industry forward, hopefully in a way that we don't have to wait 30 years for something to get built up and torn down. Maybe we may be 30 months away for the type of change that we would like to see.
I'm looking forward to GitChain. Yes, sir.
Yes.
That is
Yes, yes,
that is
a
gonna be
real
awesome.
way of bringing together version management and the immutable history of the blockchain into one thing. So thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate your your honest insight into not only what you're working on, but kind of what we ought to do as a community to bring Web3 not only to the masses in a type of like hand wavy, billion people coming in, but making so that this land that we're building, this Web3 land of various blockchain wallets and dApps, are worth moving to. It's a place that you want to migrate to, and that you want to call this your home. So many people are building this for some early Burning Man quality people. This is a desert, but for other people, this is home, and hopefully this can be home to much more many people and the different ecosystem coexisting and connecting in the internet way. That's really exciting future.
Absolutely, Chris. Really appreciate you having me on. It's a pleasure talking about all this stuff, and your insights are very valuable as well. I'm glad we were able to share and talk through this. This is awesome.
Likewise, this is a really great conversation. And as a community, as always, we like to invite builders who are actually building it and sharing their real insight, what they're actually thinking. I hope this was helpful. And until next time, take care.